The servants' stairs, hidden inside Victorian mansions, weren't built for privacy. They were built to make human beings disappear. And somewhere in the walls of a grand Victorian house, behind the oak paneling, tucked past the drawing room where the family took their tea, there is a door you were never meant to notice. Open it, and you don't find a closet. You find stairs, narrow, steep, plain, spiraling up into the dark. No carpet, no portraits, no polish, just bare treads worn smooth by 100 years of feet moving fast and moving silently. These are the servants' stairs, and thousands of them were built into the great houses of the 19th century for one very specific, very deliberate reason, so that an entire class of human beings could move through the house without ever being seen. Now, if you've spent any time on the internet, you've probably seen these framed a certain way. Victorians were so socially anxious, they built secret staircases to avoid talking to people. And I get why that version spreads. It's a great hook, and honestly, part of me wishes it were that simple. But the truth is stranger, and I'd argue darker, than social anxiety, because these stairs weren't built by nervous people trying to dodge an awkward conversation. They were built by wealthy families to make sure they never had to look at the people cooking their food, lighting their fires, emptying their chamber pots, and raising their children. The goal wasn't avoiding contact because it felt uncomfortable. The goal was avoiding contact because a whole human being, a maid, a footman, a scullery girl, was supposed to be functionally invisible, present enough to do the work, absent enough to never intrude. And once you understand that, these houses start to look less like charming architectural curiosities and more like machines. Machines designed with one purpose baked right into the floor plan. Keep two worlds under one roof and never let them meet. So in this video, we're going to actually walk those hidden stairs. We'll figure out who used them and why. We'll look at the almost unbelievable rules servants had to follow to stay unseen, including what they were supposed to do if they accidentally bumped into you in a hallway. We'll talk about the strange psychology of wanting the people closest to your daily life to also be ghosts. And yes, we'll get to the part everyone loves, the eccentric aristocrats who took this so far it did tip over into something that looks a lot like extreme social avoidance. Because a few of them built entire underground worlds just to never see another face. But it starts with a door in the wall. Let's open it. To really get why these stairs existed, you have to stop picturing a house as one connected space and start picturing it as two houses stacked into the same shell. There was the house the family lived in, the bright one, grand front staircase, wide sunlit corridors, drawing rooms, the good bedrooms, portraits climbing the walls. This was the house that guests saw. It was designed to impress, and every inch of it whispered the same message. Look how effortless our lives are. And then there was the other house, the one running quietly behind and beneath the first. The kitchens in the basement, the sculleries, the pantries, the servants' hall, the cramped attic bedrooms up top where the maids slept after 17-hour days, connected all the way through by a completely separate circulation system, back stairs, service corridors, and those hidden passages that let staff travel from the coal cellar to the top-floor nursery without once setting foot in a room the family might be using. Here's the part that gets me. That word effortless was the whole point. The luxury a Victorian family was buying wasn't just the clean rooms and the hot meals. It was the illusion that those things simply happened. The fire was always lit, but you never saw anyone light it. Breakfast appeared, but no one carried it in front of you. Your bed was made, your bath was drawn, your shoes were polished, all by hands that were supposed to leave no trace of themselves behind. The hidden stairs were the machinery that made the magic trick work. They kept the labor off stage. Think of a grand house like a theater. The family and their guests were the audience sitting in the glowing auditorium, and the servants were the stagehands, sprinting through dark passages behind the set to change the scenery between acts. The show only feels seamless if you never see the crew. And this wasn't some rare feature of a few eccentric mansions. It was standard. It was designed in. The idea actually traces back to the mid-1600s, when architects like Sir Roger Pratt, who designed Coleshill House in Berkshire in the 1650s, began deliberately separating the family's circulation routes from the servants. Pratt wrote explicitly about the importance of ensuring that servants should not disturb the family, and that principle never left English domestic architecture. By the Victorian era, it had calcified into an absolute expectation. When architects drew up plans for a proper country house, places like Tatton Hall in Cheshire or Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire, both of which you can still visit today with their servant corridors largely intact. A separate servant staircase wasn't a luxury add-on. It was as expected as a roof. Even smaller homes that could barely spare the square footage still squeezed in a second, tighter stair. Because a household that made its servants share the family's staircase was quietly announcing that it couldn't afford to do things properly. So the geography of the house became a map of the social order, up front and in the light, the people who mattered, behind the walls and under the floor, the people who made it all run, and the physical distance between those two worlds, measured in separate doors, separate stairs, separate entrances at the front and back of the house, was really social distance, poured into brick and plaster and made permanent. Which raises the obvious question. It's one thing to build separate stairs, but a big house is busy and paths cross. So what happened in the moments when the two worlds did collide, when a maid and a marquess ended up in the same corridor at the same time? The rules for that were extraordinary. Imagine you're a housemaid, it's 6 in the morning, and you're on your knees polishing the treads of that gleaming silver-plated staircase, the grand one, the family's one, which you're only allowed to touch when you're cleaning it. And you hear it, footsteps, a member of the family is coming. What are you supposed to do? You are supposed to disappear. In many great houses, the rule was explicit. If a servant was caught working in a space when the family passed through, she was to stop, turn, and make herself as small and invisible as possible, sometimes literally turning to face the wall and standing dead still until they'd gone by. Not out of shyness, out of protocol. The logic was that a family member should never be put in the awkward position of having to acknowledge a servant's existence. Your presence was an imposition on them, and it was your job to erase it. Sit with how strange that is. The discomfort being managed here wasn't the servants, it was the employers. The entire elaborate system existed to spare the wealthy the minor social friction of having to see, greet, or think about the human beings sustaining their entire way of life. And the invisibility went deeper than just ducking into a corner. Servants were expected to time their work around the family's movements, to clean the rooms while the family slept, or to work in a room only when the family had no reason to be in it. In the biggest houses, this worked so well that some of the lower servants, the scullery maids, the hall boys, could go through years of employment and barely ever come face to face with the family they served. They lived in the same house. They were essentially strangers. There were rules for the voice too. Speak only when spoken to. Address the family with the correct formal title. Sir, my lady, Mr., Mrs., never anything familiar. No eye contact beyond what a task required. Some households went further still, stripping servants of their own identities entirely, giving footmen standardized heights and matching uniforms, and even assigning generic, interchangeable names based on the position rather than the person. A new footman might simply be called by the name the last footman answered to, because the individual didn't matter. The role did. And the hierarchy within that invisible world was its own elaborate structure. At the top of the servant order sat the housekeeper and the butler, The senior staff, who managed everyone beneath them, held the keys, kept the accounts, and were the only servants who might occasionally be acknowledged by name. Below them cascaded the housemaids, the footman, the cook, the scullery maids. It was a rigid chain of command, operating entirely out of sight, and shows like Downton Abbey or The Older Upstairs, Downstairs have given modern audiences a glimpse of it, though the real thing was considerably less romantic. That's the piece that turns this from quaint into chilling. The hidden stairs weren't an isolated quirk. They were one part of a total system: architecture, etiquette, uniforms, even names, all engineered toward the same end: to keep an entire class of people physically present and personally invisible, to have them everywhere and nowhere at once. And I want to be fair here, because it wasn't universally cruel. In some houses there were genuinely warm bonds between families and long-serving staff. A few even hung portraits of beloved servants on their walls. But those were the exceptions that the system tolerated, not the rule it was built on. The default, the thing baked into the blueprints, was separation. So that's the ordinary version, the standard, expected, built-in machinery of the Victorian great house. But some people weren't satisfied with merely hiding the servants. Some of them wanted to hide from everyone, and that's where this story goes genuinely underground. Everything we've talked about so far was about hiding the servants, but there was one Victorian aristocrat who flipped the whole thing around and became a legend for it. His name was William Cavendish Scott Bentinck, the 5th Duke of Portland. And at his estate, Welbeck Abbey in Nottinghamshire, he spent an enormous fortune building what might be the most extraordinary monument to human avoidance ever constructed. The Duke didn't like being seen. That much is beyond dispute. What he did about it is the stuff that sounds invented, except it's real and you can still visit parts of it. Beneath his estate, he had an entire network of tunnels dug, miles of them, wide gas-lit passages running underground connecting different parts of his property so that he could move around without ever appearing on the surface where someone might lay eyes on him. There was reportedly a tunnel long enough to be traveled in a carriage, so he could be driven from his house toward the railway, underground, in a sealed carriage and loaded onto a train with the blinds down, all without being observed. Above ground, he built vast rooms, including what was described as an enormous underground ballroom, in a house where he entertained, as far as anyone could tell, almost no one. He had a suite of rooms set aside for himself that others were forbidden to enter, and the household ran on standing instructions to not acknowledge him. The story goes that his staff were told that if they encountered the Duke, they were to pass him as though he were a tree. No bow, no greeting, no eye contact. If he was unwell, he'd instruct a doctor to stand outside the door and diagnose him through it, while a valet relayed messages. And here's a detail that gives the whole story an unexpected literary echo. The 5th Duke of Portland is widely believed to have been one of the inspirations for Mr. Badger in Kenneth Grahame's The Wind in the Willows, the solitary creature who lives deep underground in a vast, self-constructed network of tunnels, preferring the dark and quiet to the company of the world above. Whether Graham intended the connection or not, it's hard to read that book the same way once you know about the Duke. Now, I want to be careful here because the Duke of Portland has become a bit of a folk legend, and legends grow in the telling. Some of the wilder claims about him are almost certainly exaggerated by a public that found an eccentric hermit duke irresistible. We can't diagnose a man across a century and a half, and it would be irresponsible to try to slap a modern label on him from a distance. But strip away the exaggerations, and what remains is still remarkable. A man of almost unlimited resources who used every bit of that wealth to engineer a life in which he almost never had to encounter another human face. He didn't just want the servants invisible. He wanted to be invisible himself. And here's what I find genuinely fascinating about him. The ordinary hidden stairs we've been discussing were about power, the wealthy keeping the workers out of sight. But the Duke inverted it. He turned all that architectural machinery inward and used it to hide the master instead of the staff. Same tools, opposite direction. He took the Victorian logic of separation to its absolute, lonely extreme and proved just how far a person could go if they had the money to simply not be seen. Which brings us back around to the question underneath this whole strange story. Why were the Victorians, servants, masters, dukes and all, so obsessed with not being seen in the first place? So here's the question we've been circling. Why? Why build an entire civilization of hidden stairs, back corridors, face-the-wall rules, and underground tunnels, all in service of not being seen? The easy answer, the thumbnail answer, is social anxiety. And I don't think that's quite right, because when you look at the whole picture, this wasn't really about fear, it was about control. For the wealthy family, keeping servants invisible was a way of controlling a contradiction they couldn't otherwise resolve. Their entire comfortable existence depended completely on the constant labor of people they considered beneath them. Every meal, every warm room, every clean shirt was a reminder that they could not actually take care of themselves. And the hidden stairs let them not think about that. If you never see the hands doing the work, you can almost believe the work isn't being done, that the good life is simply the natural order of things, rather than something extracted from other people's exhaustion. Invisibility wasn't just cruelty, it was a way of not having to feel the weight of your own dependence. And for the servants, the flip side of that same coin was survival. Being unseen was the job. Your value was measured by how completely you could function without ever registering as a person. How seamlessly the fire got lit, the meal appeared, the house ran. To be noticed was, in a sense, to have failed. Imagine spending your working life being trained to erase yourself. Then there's the Duke, off in his tunnels, showing us the strangest version of all, that once you have enough power to make other people invisible, you might eventually turn that power on yourself. That the same walls you build to keep others out can become the walls you hide behind. And this is where I think this old story reaches forward and touches us. Because we still do this, don't we? We've just traded architecture for technology. We have the delivery driver who leaves the package and vanishes before the door opens. The app that lets us summon food, groceries, a ride, all without a single conversation. The self-checkout, the screen we can hide behind so we never have to be fully seen. We've built our own invisible staircases. We just carry them in our pockets now. The Victorians made their desire for separation permanent, in brick and stone and plaster, and left it standing for us to walk through and marvel at. But the impulse underneath it, the wish to have the benefits of other people without the friction of actually facing them, that impulse never went away. It just went digital. So the next time you're in some grand old house and you spot a plain little door that doesn't seem to lead anywhere, open it if you can. Look at those narrow, worn stairs climbing into the dark. And remember, they weren't built to hide a staircase. They were built to hide people, and that tells you almost everything about the world that made them.